Good morning. Let me begin again. You've heard from Karen a fabulous, if you want, big picture analysis. I'm going to talk specifically about the institutional machinery for promoting equality and human rights. Having said that, before I begin talking about institutional machinery, I want to follow Karen in a way and go right back down to first principles. This was born out of an interesting discussion I had recently following the Portmarnock decision in the Supreme Court with a close family member. I won't say who it is because my first cousin is in the room today, so I won't specify exactly which family member it was. But we had a very interesting discussion as to what on earth public funds were, why the Equality Authority were spending public funds trying to force Portmarnock Golf Club to no longer discriminate against women. And it's always very interesting when close family members say to you, Colm, what are you doing? You talk about this, you travel and talk about this. Are you basically on some phenomenal European-wide junket? Why is our money being spent on all of this? And I think it's worthwhile thinking about first principles just for a moment. There's a set of instrumentalist and principled reasons for why it's important to protect equality and human rights. You know the principled reasons if you're here in this room, I'm guessing. In any case, I often feel that we talk sometimes too much on the realm of high principle and don't sometimes hammer out some of the instrumentalist reasons why equality and human rights are extremely important as well. You can see the list in front of you. I'm not going through them all. I would just highlight two in particular, which I'm going to come back to. First of all, the need to ensure critical self-reflection as a society. And secondly, the need to ensure good governance. I think these factors are often underlooked in the debate about equality and human rights and how you shape institutions that promote equality and human rights. A key job of any human rights institution has to be encouraging critical self-reflection. And I think sometimes that's an aspect that's overlooked. Human rights are often presented as consensual things. We've all agreed on these fabulously high-flown principles, and it's disgraceful they're not being implemented. That ignores the fact that debates about equality and human rights are often contested, different interpretations, different arguments about what protecting equality and human rights involve. And it's precisely here that equality and human rights institutions come into play, that their job is to fight some of these contested battles, to argue the case for equality and human rights, and to encourage a social process of reflecting on what should be important within our society. The reason why, and again, just going back to first principles, the reason why we have independent state bodies given taxpayers' money to promote equality and human rights is that there is a gap in our social institutions. Courts and tribunals can only do so much protecting equality and rights. Same with the ombudsman. Government, sometimes good, sometimes not so good. Civil society, NGOs, like many people in this room. Burke famously lionized them. That's a quote from Burke. Acclaimed post-1989, you'll have seen a lot of the literature on the Berlin Wall coming down and how important civil society was. But as you will know, because most of you will be working in this area, as you know, civil society can only achieve so much, underfunded, overstretched, and lacking a distinct status. As someone said to me recently in Belfast, if I have to fill out another consultation document, I think my printer will explode. And then also, of course, you've trade unions, religious organisations, other established social organisations, political parties, very influential, but playing specific roles in our society. Independent state bodies are designed to fill a gap. as you can set out here. They're used in other areas: consumer rights, auditing, monetary regulation, and so on. It's when you need to use taxpayers' money to fill a gap in our existing institutional architecture. And this is why you have this development towards having independent equality and human rights bodies across the globe. This is all first principle stuff. Much of it you'll be familiar with. Now, let's turn to specifics. The Irish experience. Okay? Equality Authority, Human Rights Commission, born in the wake of Belfast Agreement, building on existing institutions. Throughout the 2000s, often acclaimed across the EU as best practice models. I've maybe made a slightly cheeky remark there, perhaps a relatively rare accolade when it comes to Irish governance. I could be wrong on that. It is worthwhile pointing out, though, in conference after conference across Europe, it was emphasized to me and to others about, from an external perspective, how strong the institutional architecture was in Ireland and how impressive the representatives of both the Equality Authority and the Human Rights Commission were throughout the 2000s, to me, in a variety of contexts. That point is well worth making, an external perspective. We have the current situation. You're aware of the current situation. This gives rise, I think, to some interesting questions. If you look at the first principles I've been talking about and look at our current situation, this gives rise to a sort of interesting question for us all to ask about, is the existing institutional framework sustainable? If we have independent human rights bodies who are supposed to be filling a particular gap in our social architecture, is that gap being filled? I think there are issues in the current system. Now, we'll have the launch of the report, and I don't want to spoil the fun and games of that analysis. But I think there is wide acceptance that our existing framework is not, as it stands as of today, is perhaps not adequately delivering on requirements. Requirements set out in our obligations under the Belfast Agreement, requirements under the relevant EU directive, and also the expectations established by good practice. We have, frankly, and this is an external perspective as well, it's not just a perspective within Ireland, there has been, frankly, the perception anyway, you can decide for yourselves whether it's justified, a fall from grace, from European best practice models to a set of circumstances that gives rise to questions. If we're to think about where we go forward from here and what we want equality and human rights institutions to be doing in 10, 15, 20 years' time, I think, again, it's important to think about first principles. There's always been a tension in independent bodies charged with equality and human rights functions between the expectations that they will enforce law on equality and human rights and their activist role. Okay. Some equality and human rights institutions are enforcement bodies. They apply the law. They take decisions. They act as quasi-judicial institutions. They effectively are very similar to the Office of the Ombudsman. Others, like the UK commissions, are now effectively activist bodies. They campaign for change through legal and political activism. Okay? Interestingly, the UK commissions in the 70s began as enforcement bodies, moved towards activism when they realized that you simply couldn't get away, it simply wouldn't work to mechanically attempt to apply equality law. That you needed to be campaigning, you needed to be controversial, because otherwise your powers and your functions and your impact were limited.